Joel.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Cumming, this will be the second time in a week where I'm going to climb in the boat with you, sir.
Uh-oh, boat analogies.
Oh, boat analogy for the day. Ms. Del Greco, this may be a longer day for you than many. My oldest son's a police officer. He's a detective in Michigan. And as I read this, I'm frankly appalled. I wasn't informed that when my driver's license was renewed, my photograph was going to be in a repository that could be searched by law enforcement across the country. As you did your MOU with the Michigan State Police, what efforts did you take to make sure, in fact, privacy requirements were maintained?
Well, first, we looked at the state law and worked with the state to ensure that there was a state law that allowed for the use of those records for law enforcement purposes.
So we made sure there's a state law that said privacy didn't matter.
It was a privacy document with regard to driver's license photos in the state.
So again, if the state said it was okay that we collected them, I'm not aware of anything in the state of Michigan that said they can provide those photos to other parties for law enforcement purposes.
We work with the state's legal counsel along with our legal counsel to ensure that the appropriate laws are in place before an MOU is drafted and approved.
So law enforcement all got together and said it's okay, and we're going to do that. Follow-up question for you. As a I spent 35 years in private business, and we had to comply with federal privacy laws. We were involved in student education, student aid, and I was subject to criminal and civil penalties personally as the CEO of the company if, in fact, we failed to maintain privacy laws. What civil and criminal penalties has the Department of Justice been subjected to for failure to comply with the privacy requirements?
With regard to FACE services?
Well, with regard to filing the updated privacy information that the chairman referred to a few years late.
That I am not an expert to speak on, sir.
You're not aware, so we don't know whether or not. Has any action been taken for failure to move forward? You said you implemented the report. Has any been action taken for the individuals that stopped the report because it was not issued?
I have no knowledge.
There are days ignorance is bliss. I appreciate that. Question for Mr. Bedoya, if you would, sir. Is there any legal standard that law enforcement must use in order to request access to the database? I see on page 3 of the GAO report, there's effectively the state makes a request and then they access the database. Is there any legal standard for access there, sir?
Sure. For the FBI can open an investigation, can run a face recognition search of, for example, your face in Michigan on mere allegation or information.
How about the state agency requesting the information from the FBI and or other states? What do they have to submit?
The state agency has to have a criminal justice purpose, but is not required to have reasonable suspicion to search the FBI's database.
So they don't have to tell the FBI why it is they're asking for access to that database, just that they need it?
I'm not familiar with the exact fields they need to fill out, but they do not need to meet the most minimal standard, which would be reasonable suspicion.
Ms. Del Greco, can you explain that?
A state law enforcement agency must have an originating agency identifier. They have to be a criminal justice agency. In fact, for FACE services, they have to be in a law enforcement agency, so the rules are a little bit more refined.
So, refined, I guess, but so long as you're a law enforcement agency, you can request access to the database because they say they want it.
They have to have an agency identifier in order to do so.
And agency identifier is what, please?
It's an identifier that we provide to an authorized law enforcement agency that has authorized purposes to our system.
So they have to have the top secret code.
We clarify and verify that that agency is authorized to have access to our system.
But again, they haven't had to provide any indication of investigation, or has been noted by my colleagues, a search warrant or what the investigation is, just that they want access for some, correct?
It has to be for law enforcement purposes.
Based upon someone saying it is, without any documentation?
Based on their rules and their authorities within their state, yes, sir.
Mr. Bedoya or Ms. Lynch, any comment on that?
Sir, I can quickly comment on that. The FBI leaves it entirely to the states to decide what their policies will be for when they and why they search this database above the standards that Ms. Del Greco raised. And frankly, I think we need to take a step back and ask, if this technology had been in place, for the Boston Tea Party or during the 1960 civil rights protests, what would have happened then? I think this is a very serious issue across the board.
Well, I think the issue goes beyond the First Amendment concerns that were expressed by Ms. Lynch and is broader. I don't want to just protect someone if they're in a political protest from being identified. The reality is we should protect everybody unless there is a valid, documented criminal justice action. Why should my photo, oh, God knows lately it's on every workplace in the world, including Facebook, be subject because I get a driver's license to access? And I agree with the ranking member. The comment regarding well, we don't have access to that is disingenuous. Because, frankly, the FBI has access, through one means or another, whether you own the database or not, to 400 million photos of Americans, solely because you say you have a criminal justice reason for them. I have to tell you, and my time is expiring, I apologize, Mr. Chairman, to me that's appalling. And I would join in taking actions to, in fact, limit that dramatically. I'm sorry for going over. I appreciate the patience, and I yield back, sir.
Thank the gentleman. We'll now recognize